Okay, the doors are closed, so I suppose I ought to get started. My name is Tom Teper. I'm the AUL for Collections and Technical Services at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I'm here to discuss with you for a few minutes a project that we had that looked at assessing some usage of print materials and trying to see if there was any correspondence between the usage of those print items and their status as digitized items delivered through the HathiTrust. So for the next few minutes, I'll provide a brief introduction on the project, talk a little bit about the methodology and problem statement that we had, and give you some preliminary results and then the conclusions. And we've been going back and refining a little bit of the data. It's not yet ready for publication, but I can talk a little bit about that. So really this research project sought to test both professional lore and some speculative assertions that have been made over the years. The twin realms of many good research projects. The professional lore being examined is that digitization always makes the demand for the original corresponding physical items decline. We had some evidence that this might be the case for general collections. Overall, print usage appears to be down as digital availability has gone up. We have documentation of overall user preference that in many disciplines that they desire the convenience of digital access when it's available. But there's really very little directly tying the usage of actual physical items scanned to their original counterparts. The only firm data that we had, that we found related to this emerged from an IFLA survey that asked multiple national libraries about the demand on physical counterparts once they had been digitized. This survey, however, it claimed that there was increased demand, but it was published in 1999 and dealt explicitly with special collections materials. It's very dated at this point in time. So now the speculative assertion that we were trying to test is that once general collections materials were digitized and widely available, the usage of their print counterparts for those items that are in the public domain would decline, whereas the usage of print counterparts for those items still embargoed would see an increase in demand because that increased discoverability would actually would encourage people to find those print items. It was an assertion that really wasn't tested, either against the holdings of a single institution or against the broader corpus of digitized content that many of our institutions have actually contributed toward building. So in moving from speculation to firm evidence, the opportunity arose to answer a broad array of questions about how the availability of digital content would impact the usage of print materials. The initial discussions about the desire to tackle this problem coalesced around a desire to resolve 8 questions, really only 3 of which we're going to explore here. Are there subject-based differences in the ongoing demand for the original print resources? Is there a measurable difference in demand for those print resources from the periods before and after their digitization? And is there a difference in demand after digitization for those items that are freely available as full text, most being pre-1923 publications through this period of study, when compared to those in which copyright or other restrictions limited digital access? Now, in addition to those questions, 5 other questions remain for us to explore in more depth, many of which attempt to examine interlibrary loan or document delivery usage or the tie-ins with ebook access. The challenges associated with compiling the data have, frankly, delayed that work. It's a voluminous amount of data, and as you'll see, it really doesn't talk to it. The sets don't talk to each other very well. As outlined, the project's ambitious. How does one assess the impact of digitization on print usage? Does one limit the assessment to just local usage, or does one attempt to incorporate the broad impact of digital distribution on usage via local, regional, and national borrowing networks. Moreover, where do we get all the data for this? And how do we effectively mine it? And to do this, we were left with trying to manage multiple data sets from multiple different sources that did not naturally speak to one another because there often weren't common identifying points. So in order to begin addressing the challenges posed by the scale of the data we were talking about, their different sources and their inability to naturally speak to one another, a lot of work was required before we could even start querying that data. We needed to gather the data sets. We needed to begin the process of importing them into a single database, and we needed to execute some data cleanup and manipulation just to begin that process. So, gathering the data sets. What we ended up with were really 4 different sets of data. We had 10.7 million records that accounted for every physical published monograph / journal volume / pamphlet in our collection. And that accounted for everything we held up through January of 2018. We also brought in a data set, which here is 2.1, which was about 8.2 million records that accounted for the archive transaction table from our collection. That is all original circulations, checkout and renewal, and returns, not renewals, from our collection that dated from the period 2002, January through October of 2018. Then we had the current transactions table that logged another 93,000 items that were currently checked out from our collection. And finally, we had to bring in a record set of about 751,000 items that identified those materials from our collection that were digitized and delivered via the Hadi Trust. And that was up through October of 2018. Now, what we were looking at was a very sizable body of material, and something far in excess of what Excel or any common databases would be able to manage. And I was very, very fortunate in having a graduate student at the time who had a background in computer science and applied mathematics. And she and I worked on developing an MS SQL server database that allowed us to bring all of this together at that point in time. That said, even all brought together, there was a lot of cleaning and manipulation that we had to do to make this functional. Ensuring that the data sets could be queried in any meaningful way required addressing some deficiencies in what we had. For example, the data did not have the title subject heading information. Therefore, subject headings, classes or subclasses had to be assigned to titles based on call number mapping. That was further complicated by the fact that our institution over the years has used both the LC classification for a lot of material, but historically Dewey. And unfortunately not a standardized Dewey, but something that we locally have called exceptional Dewey because for whatever reason, it was deemed exceptional. Now, similarly, we needed to examine that data just to see what had to be cleaned up. We had inconsistencies, it should be surprising given the standards that are out there, but over 100 years, there's been variability in the cataloging applied and how things were accounted for and dates or formats were represented, between, the manual interventions of individuals, the retrospective conversions, and everything else that's happened. There was a lot that needed to be addressed. Then we had to figure out how to narrow these data sets in some ways. Now, in order to ensure that our project was comparing apples to apples, with respect to answering questions about the impact of digitization on the use of specific titles. We had to narrow the study to single-volume monographs as well as multi-volume monographs with exact matches to the digitized volumes. This means that our final data set of the library's print collection consisted of about 4.1 million single-volume monographs and a further 1.2 million multi-volume monographs. And of that 5.3 million items we had, that equaled about 5.3 million items. And we had other items such as computer files, maps, mixed materials, scores, sound recordings, and visual materials that all needed to be eliminated out of that. We also had to narrow the data set of items from the Hathi Trust. So the data set of items digitized from our collection spanned from the period 2010 through 2016. It contained 265,000 monographic items out of the 750,000 total digitized items. For 209,000 out of those, about 79%, we were able to determine the item ID based off of the bibliographic identifier and the volume information to get exact matches. And of these, about 12.8% of the digitized monographs, or only 26,918, displayed any evidence of use for their print components between 2000 and 2017. They circulated a total of almost 43,000 times during that period, excluding the renewals, but really it was only a fraction of the total number. So the other thing that you'll notice is that the data set that we're talking about spanned from 2010 through October of 2018. Yet we ended up limiting our study to the items that were digitized to 2010 through 2016. And the reason we did that is that we wanted to ensure that there was at least one full year of potential circulation data to bookend each of these digitized items. So items in 2008 that were digitized in 2018 would have had very limited opportunity to circulate. So there was really no way for us to effectively prorate partial years and account for that in any meaningful way. Now the circulation data set also had to be narrowed down to full years of access across all categories. Because again, we wanted to ensure that we had at least one full year of potential circulation data for each of those items before and after their digitization. The next challenge we had was actually connecting these data sets and making them talk to one another. Now, with respect to the specifics of this study, we sought to quantify whether there were changes in the usage of print resources after their digitization and delivery via Hathi Trust compared to the period prior to their digitization. And in order to accomplish this, it became necessary for us to link the three data sets when they shared no common point of intersection and to identify the usage of those individual items. So what we had was a print collection data set in which we were able to find a bibliographic ID enumeration that we could connect to the data set of digitized items in Hathi Trust via the item ID that then matched back over to the circulation data set and actually was able to tell us if those specific volumes had circulated. So after we did that, what did we learn? Well, the first question we had was, an attempt to determine whether there were any subject-based differences in the ongoing demand for the print resources. And in fact, the results indicate that, yes, there were. There are actually measurable differences in the usage of print resources based off their classification. So when we look at that data set of 10.6 million items that we started with, We had about 5.6 million items that were in the Dewey classification, another 1.2 million that were in the Library of Congress, and 300,000 GovDocs, and at the time about 1.9 million that we had not yet managed to classify, because they employed a multitude of local schemes tailored for specific specialized collections. They included records of withdrawn items. They included errors in the call numbers or other critical identifying information that complicated it. So what we ended up with was a total number of items in the print collection that we could use that was about 6.7 million. Now, overall, almost 24% of the items in all formats represented in the data set circulated between 2002 and 2017. Now, the total number of circulations for those items was about 5.2 million. Now, on average, over that time period, each item circulated 3.3 times. So a fair amount of repetition. Now, when reviewed by classification range in both the library's Dewey and Library of Congress call numbers, the percent of circulated titles per subject area ranged from as low as 7% in Library of Congress classification A, the general works, and as high as 63.97% in LC classification E, the history of the Americas. Now, the circulation for the LC classifications, though, needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because we only recently shifted to cataloging most of these items in LC. So as a result, they are predominantly newer titles. But you can see what the vast range is there. Now, if we look at the average circulation per title by subject area, there's a significant difference in that as well, with average circulations of as low as 1.8 circulations per item for the general works in LC, and actually as high as 4.5 circulations per item in LC classifications for medicine, science, music, and books on music, and the history of the Americas. So what really jumped out as the surprise is medicine. Frankly, we just did not expect to see that high of usage, especially since our campus has only just created a College of Medicine 2 years ago. We've never had one in the past. So the second question we were hoping to answer is whether there was a measurable difference in demand for those print resources from the periods before and after their digitization. And again, the answer to that was yes. The preliminary results indicated that when the average annual usage was calculated, a measurable difference in demand appeared for those resources. And the decrease is evident when reviewing the average circulation per year for those pre- and post-digitization periods. So, getting a response to this question, though, required further work to focus our data on items that we both digitized and had some demonstrated evidence of circulation. For those items digitized from our collection between the period 2010 through 2016, as I noted, it contained 265,000 monographs out of a total of 751,000 total items. For 209,000 of those, 79%, we were able to determine exact matches. And of these, about 12.8% of the digitized monographs, just 26,918 displayed any evidence of use for their print counterparts between 2002 and 2017. And during that period, they circulated just under 43,000 times. Now, by examining, just the 2010 digitization year, which is the one all the way over on the left, one can view data for digitized items with a relatively balanced number of years before and after their digitization. So before, they would have had 9 years to potentially circulate, and after, 7 years of potential circulation. The overall number of initial circulations per year actually declined from 449,000 times per year, no, 58,000 times per year to 28.57 times per year in that 2010 year. Now, the decrease is evident when reviewing the average circulation per year for the pre and post digitization periods in total. For the pre-digitization period, the average annual circulation for a print counterpart of the digitized items stands at 449. And when reviewing the post-digitization period, the corresponding annual usage data declined to about 140. So there was a significant decrease overall. And then, lastly, the final question we were trying to answer was whether there was any difference in the demand after digitization for those items that were freely available as full text, most being pre-1923, when compared to those in which copyright or other restrictions limited the digital access. And the answer to that is yes. Is yes. However, the results appear to contradict the speculation that the availability of full text access decreases demand on the original item, whereas the availability of only snippet views might drive up demand. So in our data set, we held 209,000 monographs that were digitized between 2010 and 16. And correcting for those items with a bad publication date reduced that sample pool by another 2,800 items. So what you see in this chart is actually an illustration of the number of pre- and post-1923 items digitized per year from our collection. In some years that pre-23, greatly exceeded the post-23, in other years, vice versa. But this was really based off the demand we had from our digitization partner, Google at the time, and also the Internet Archive. So now, out of the total body of monographs, 26,428 circulated between 2002 and 2017. Of the 108,836 published before 1923, just over 16% circulated between 2002 and 17. And for the 97,000 published after 1923, we had just over 99% circulate during that same period. So thus, for the digitized monographs, what we see is that the pre-1923 titles circulated almost twice as many times as their post-1923 counterparts. As for frequency of use, both pre- and post-1923 titles actually had a frequency of use equaling about 1.5 circulations per title. Now, let's see. Now, comparing the rates of circulation for pre- and post-1923 publications after digitization, really made us speculate a little bit about the impact of full text access. And what we saw is that the average number of circulations per year before and after digitization for pre-1923 items before their digitization was about 294, and after digitization was just about 85. Now, if we look at the post-1923 items, we saw an average per year number of circulations before digitization of about 148, and after digitization of about 53. Now, in both cases, what we're looking at is an overall decline. The circulations after digitization for pre-1923 items totaled about 1,552 times. And the circulation for post-1923 items after digitization only totaled 677. So what we ended up doing was taking a look at the 25,923 circulations before digitization and divided that by the total number of pre-1923 digitized items. And what that gave us was a frequency of use of 0.238. If we look at the same data for after digitization for those items, what we end up with is a frequency of use of 0.014. Now, for the post-1923 items, we had 13,836 circulations before digitization. We divided that by the total number of digitized items, 97,723. And what we ended up seeing is a frequency of use of 0.14. If we take the 677 circulations that those items had after digitization, this is the post-1923, items that are largely only available in a snippet view, what we had was, actually a very small 0.0069 frequency of use. Oops, sorry. So what we ended up seeing overall is an increase in the demand, a greater decrease in the demand of materials that were before digitization, Now, an analysis of usage by subject area provided similarly interesting results. Now, what we had to do in order to avoid skewing the results, because we had with only about 26,000 items, we had such small samples in some of the subject areas, was to limit the analysis to only those where we had over 100 items per subject digitized. And what we ended up seeing was that for pre-1923, the four most used subject areas included language and literature in the LC classification and Dewey classifications for philosophy, history and geography, arts and recreation, and religion. And for post-1923, we actually saw very similar results. History and geography, religion, philosophy, language and literature in both Dewey and LC. So, in conclusion, what we ended up really finding out from all of this is, frankly, some confirmation. We expected there to be differences in demand by subject area, and it was confirmed. We did expect to see a decline in the average annual usage after digitization, and that's exactly what happened. But what was a bit of a surprise was that the decline occurred regardless of the copyright status, at least as defined by year of publication. That said, what we ended up seeing is that the pre-1923 items actually circulated more frequently than the post-1923 items. That was a bit of a surprise, because in fact what we expected was that the full text access would make that drop much more precipitously than you would see for the items that only had that snippet view. And that's really it. That's my contact information, and my graduate student, who is now on the market, if anyone's interested, is Vera, and she'd be happy to have any inquiries. Thank you.
I'm just curious to know if you used a control group to see if some of those subjects would have behaved the same, whether they had been digitized or not.
It's a good question. We did not. We just looked at the body of materials we had. So what we are trying to do now is clean up the As I mentioned, there were about 1.9 million items. We could not verify their subject area and exact matches, and we've been going through and working to clean that up. And at this point, the preliminary result is that there's virtually no change. By adding another almost 2 million items to the sample set, it really has not changed what we have in terms of the outcome. The pre-23 items are still, marginally circulating more than the post-1923 items.
So you've got a very large data set, so I don't think this makes a difference, but did you account for any drop-off, the natural drop-off that takes place? I'm thinking a book that was published in 2002 won't circulate as much in 2010, but the difference in circulation in 2008, 2009 versus digitization and just after that, it feels like it's a small enough piece of your data set, it doesn't make a difference, but did you do any control for that?
We did weight the numbers by years that they had potential to circulate. What we didn't do was try to factor in any figure for what the natural decline in circulation might be, because, frankly, it'd be very hard for us to say. In some cases, you could look at disciplines like history, and there's often an uptick after a few years as reviews start coming out and other things. So it would be very hard to try and do that. So. Anyone else? Okay. So this session was originally scheduled to have two of us presenting, and the other person canceled because they couldn't make it out here. So I think you have free time.